A wooden box covered in pure gold. On the outside, just over a meter long. On the inside, according to the biblical text itself, the literal presence of the creator of the universe. 2 men touched it without authorization. They died instantly. An entire army captured it as a war trophy. Within 7 months, entire cities were devastated by tumors and plagues so violent that the captors begged to return it. And when 70 men from an Israelite village made the mistake of opening the lid and looking inside, the text of 1 Samuel records a number that makes the blood run cold. 50,070 dead. 1 box. No mechanism, no visible weapon, no army guarding it. And yet, no object in the history of humanity has generated more fear, more reverence, and more obsession than the Ark of the Covenant. Empires coveted it. Kings killed for it. Entire nations were judged in its presence. And then, at a moment no one can explain with certainty, it simply disappeared. No record, no farewell, no funeral. The most powerful object to ever exist on the face of the earth vanished as if it had never existed. And the question that has haunted archaeologists, theologians, and historians for more than 2,500 years remains without a definitive answer. Where is the Ark of the Covenant now? To understand the truth about this object, we need to go back to the exact moment it was conceived. And no, it was not Moses' idea. It was not the suggestion of any priest. The order came directly from God. And the level of detail in this order is, in itself, disturbing. We are in the Sinai Desert, around 1446 BC, according to the most accepted chronology. The people of Israel have just left Egypt. Thousands of people are camped in the middle of absolutely nothing, sand, rock, and merciless sun. Moses climbs Mount Sinai and stays there for 40 days, 40 nights, no food, no water. Alone in the presence of something the text describes as a consuming fire on the mountaintop, a thick cloud that covered the entire peak with lightning and thunder so violent that the people in the camp below trembled with fear. It is in this setting that God gives Moses the design for the ark, and pay attention to the details because they reveal something most people have never noticed. Exodus chapter 25, starting from verse 10. God does not speak in vague terms. He doesn't say build a beautiful box. He specifies every inch. The ark was to be made of acacia wood, not just any wood, specifically acacia, one of the few trees that survive in the Sinai desert. 2.5 cubits long, 1.5 cubits wide, 1.5 cubits high. In modern measurements, approximately 3 feet 9 inches long, by 2 feet 3 inches wide, by 2 feet 3 inches high. A box that would fit inside a compact car. But this box was to be overlaid with pure gold, inside and out. Beaten gold covering every millimeter of the surface. Around the upper edge, a gold molding. The Hebrew text uses the word zer, which means crown. The ark had a crown, and on the sides, 4 rings of cast gold, 2 on each side, through which poles of acacia wood, also overlaid with gold, would pass. And here enters a detail that most people completely ignore. Exodus says something strange. The poles were never to be removed, never. The poles were to remain inside the rings permanently. Think about that. If the ark was meant to be kept in a sacred place, first in the tabernacle, then in the temple, why keep the transport poles always in place? It's like buying a house and never taking the wheels off the moving truck. Unless the intention was for the ark to always be ready to move, always ready to go. As if God were saying from day one, I do not stay still. I go where my people go. And when I decide to move, there will be no time to assemble anything. But the most impressive component of the ark was not the box. It was the lid. The Hebrew text calls this lid the kaporet. Most English translations translate it as the mercy seat. But the root of the Hebrew word is kafar, which means to cover, to atone, to make reconciliation. The lid of the ark was not just a lid. It was the place where forgiveness happened, the exact point in the universe where God's justice and God's mercy met. And upon this lid, two figures that to this day provoke debate among scholars, the cherubim. Two cherubim of solid gold, not gold beaten over wood like the rest of the ark, pure cast gold, hammered from a single piece along with the lid. Exodus is emphatic. The cherubim and the mercy seat were to be one piece, not soldered, not fitted together, born from the same mass of gold. These cherubim had their wings spread upwards, covering the mercy seat, and their faces, facing each other, looked down toward the lid. And it is exactly here, between the wings of these two cherubim, that God says something that changes everything. Exodus. Read it with me. There I will meet with you and speak with you from above the mercy seat, from between the two cherubim that are over the ark of the testimony. Do you understand what just happened? God just gave an address, a physical geographical point, locatable in space. The creator of everything, who, according to the biblical text itself, cannot be contained by the highest heavens, chose a spot between two gold sculptures on top of a wooden box in the middle of the desert and said, "This is where I will be. This is where I will speak." The Ark of the Covenant was not a symbol, it was not a metaphor. It was not a ritual object like those that existed in all the religions of the ancient world. It was, according to the text, the earthly throne of God, the contact point between heaven and earth. And the most terrifying part, it was mobile. It went where the people went. It entered battles, it crossed rivers, it brought down walls. If you believe this is real, the Ark was the most dangerous object to ever exist. If you believe it is a myth, you still need to explain why an entire nation organized its life, its religion, its wars, and its identity around a golden wooden box for centuries. But before we follow the journey of the Ark, we need to understand what was inside it, because the content is as revealing as the container. The Bible lists 3 objects kept inside the Ark. 3. Each with a meaning that most preachers have never properly explained. The first and most obvious are the tablets of the law, the 2 stone slabs where God wrote the 10 Commandments. And here I need to tell you something many people don't know. These were not the first tablets. The first tablets, written by the very finger of God, according to Exodus, were broken. Moses came down from the mountain, saw the people worshipping a golden calf, and in a rage threw the tablets to the ground. They shattered into pieces. God had to write them again. The tablets that were kept inside the Ark were the second version, which means that inside the most sacred object in the universe, there was physical proof that the people had already failed before they even began. The second object, the jar of manna. Exodus records that God commanded Moses to keep an omer of manna, that supernatural food that fell from the sky every day to feed the people in the desert. The fascinating detail is that normal manna spoiled within 24 hours. Anyone who tried to keep it from one day to the next woke up to a pot full of worms. But the manna inside the Ark never spoiled. The same food that rotted in hours on the outside remained intact on the inside. Whatever was in that space between the cherubim affected even the laws of organic decomposition. And the third object was perhaps the strangest of all, Aaron's rod, a dry, dead rod cut from an almond tree. Numbers chapter 17 tells us there was a rebellion. The people questioned Aaron's authority as high priest. God commanded each tribe to bring a rod and place them before the ark. The next morning, 11 rods were still dry. Aaron's had sprouted, blossomed, and produced ripe almonds overnight. Dead wood producing living fruit. 3 objects. The broken law, a reminder of human failure. The preserved manna, a reminder of divine provision. The rod that blossomed, a reminder that God chooses whom he wills, and death does not have the last word. And all of this sealed inside a box that no one could open, no one could touch, covered by a lid called the place of forgiveness, with 2 angels looking down. If this was designed by a human mind, it was the most brilliant mind in the history of religion. If it was designed by God, every inch carried a message that would take centuries to be fully understood. But the ark was not made to stay still, it was made to move. And when it moved for the first time, what happened redefined what those people understood about war, about power, and about the presence of God among men. The ark was built by a man named Bezalel. Exodus 31:2 says that God called him by name, one of the few artisans in the Bible directly named by God, and filled him with the Spirit of God in wisdom, understanding and knowledge in all kinds of craftsmanship. Bezalel was not just a skilled carpenter. The text says he received supernatural ability to work with gold, silver, bronze, precious stones, and wood. Imagine the hands of this man, beating gold in the desert under the Sinai sun, shaping the cherubim millimeter by millimeter, knowing that what he was building would be inhabited by the presence of the living God. And when the ark was ready, something happened that left Moses speechless. Exodus. The moment the ark was placed inside the tabernacle for the first time, the text says a cloud covered the tent, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle in such a way that Moses, the same man who had spent 40 days in God's presence on Sinai, could not enter. The presence was too dense, too heavy, too real, and from that moment on, the ark became the absolute center of everything. The camp of Israel in the desert was organized around it. The 12 tribes camped in formation around the tabernacle where the ark stayed. When the cloud over the tabernacle lifted, the people disassembled everything and marched. When the cloud stopped, the people stopped. The ark dictated when they slept, when they woke up, where they went, and when they stopped. One object controlled the life of an entire nation. Numbers says the ark went ahead of the people during the marches at a distance of a 3-day journey. 3 days ahead. The ark went first, alone, carried by the Levite priests at the front of everything, as if it were clearing the way, preparing the ground, facing whatever lay ahead before the people arrived. And it is exactly in this context of marching that the ark performs the first truly impossible thing recorded in the Bible after the plagues of Egypt, the Jordan River, Joshua chapter 3. Moses had already died. Joshua was the new leader, and the people were standing on the east bank of the Jordan, looking at Jericho on the other side. The problem, the text specifies it was harvest time, the only period of the year when the Jordan overflowed. The river that usually was a few meters wide was flooded with strong currents, wide enough to be impassable for hundreds of thousands of people with children, the elderly, animals, and supplies. God's command was specific. The priests carrying the ark were to step into the water first. Not the army, not the scouts, the priests with the ark. And the people were to maintain a distance of approximately 900 meters behind, 2,000 cubits, because in the words of Joshua 3:4, you have not passed this way before. The ark went first, always first. Joshua 3:15-16 describes what happened when the priest's feet touched the edge of the waters coming from above, from the source, stopped. They rose up like a wall a great distance away, near a city called Adam, and the waters flowing down toward the Dead Sea were completely cut off. The riverbed dried up, and the priests stood still with the ark in the middle of the dry Jordan, while an entire nation crossed on dry ground. If you agree that the Ark of the Covenant is the most impressive object in the entire Bible, comment, "The Ark is real." The detail few notice is this. Joshua says that at the instant, the exact instant, the priests with the ark stepped onto the opposite bank, the waters returned. Not gradually, not in minutes, immediately, as if someone had opened a dam. The river overflowed again as before. The precision of the event is what is most impressive. It wasn't a seasonal drought. It wasn't a geological coincidence. It was timed with the steps of the priests carrying the ark. And now, with the people on the other side of the Jordan, the ark would face its first war. And the way this war happened is so strange that it defies any known military logic in human history. Jericho, the oldest continuously inhabited city in the world. Walls that archaeologists like Kathleen Kenyon documented as being up to 12 feet thick in some spots, with an estimated height of 15 to 25 feet, surrounded by an outer ditch, a city designed to be impregnable. Joshua had no siege engines. He had no catapults. He had no ladders high enough. According to any rational military analysis, taking Jericho without siege equipment would be impossible, and the strategy God gave Joshua sounded like a joke. Joshua chapter 6. March around the city once a day for 6 days. In total silence, no shouting, no attacking, just marching. The Ark of the Covenant in the center of the procession, carried by priests, with 7 priests blowing 7 trumpets of ram's horns before it. On the 7th day, march 7 times around. And at the end of the 7th lap, when the trumpets sounded, all the people were to shout. Imagine the scene from the viewpoint of the inhabitants of Jericho. From the top of the walls, they watch an entire army walking in circles, in silence, carrying a golden box. Day after day, not attacking, not speaking, just walking. The psychological effect must have been devastating. But what came next was worse. On the 7th day, on the 7th lap, the trumpets sounded and the people shouted. Joshua says the wall collapsed flat. The Hebrew text uses the expression tateha, which literally means under itself. The wall didn't fall outward. It didn't fall inward. It fell straight down onto its own foundations. And this is exactly what the archaeological excavations of John Gustang in 1930 and Kathleen Kenyon in the 1950s found. Bricks fallen at the base of the wall, forming a ramp of rubble that would allow attackers to climb directly into the city. Now, is it possible to explain this without the supernatural? Some have tried. Earthquakes are frequent in the Jordan Valley region. The Great Rift Fault Line passes exactly through there. But an earthquake doesn't explain the chronometric precision. It doesn't explain why it fell exactly on the 7th day, on the 7th lap, at the exact moment of the shout. And it doesn't explain another detail Joshua records. The people went up into the city, every man straight before him. The wall fell uniformly around the entire perimeter. Every soldier could enter from the nearest point. There wasn't a single breach point. There was total and simultaneous collapse. The ark was not a weapon. It was something much more dangerous than a weapon. It was a declaration. The God who dwells between the cherubim does not need armies. He needs obedience. But if Jericho showed the power of the ark when Israel obeyed, what happened shortly after showed the danger when Israel disobeyed. And this is the part of the story that changes the ark from a sacred object into a terrifying one, because the same presence that brought down walls and dried up rivers began to kill the very people it was supposed to protect. And the list of the dead spared no one, not priests, not kings, not entire nations. Prepare yourself, because the next part of this story contains some of the most disturbing episodes in the entire Bible. And what they reveal about the nature of the ark is something that will completely change how you understand this object. The first sign that something had changed came immediately after Jericho. The next city in the way was Ai, a small city, so insignificant that Joshua's spies returned, saying it wasn't even worth sending the whole army. 2,000 or 3,000 men would be enough. Total confidence. After all, they had just brought down the walls of Jericho with a shout. What could a tiny city do? Joshua sent about 3,000 soldiers, and what happened at Ai was a humiliation. The men of Ai came out, attacked, and the Israelites fled. 36 soldiers of Israel died, a small number in absolute terms, but the effect was seismic. Joshua 7:5 says, "The hearts of the people melted and became like water." It wasn't about the 36 dead, it was about what those deaths meant. The protection had been withdrawn. Something between Israel and the ark had broken. Joshua tore his clothes, fell with his face to the ground before the ark, and stayed there until evening. And God answered with a chilling sentence. Israel has sinned. A single man, a soldier named Achan, had stolen part of the spoils of Jericho that should have been dedicated to God. A Babylonian garment, 200 shekels of silver, and a bar of gold. He hid it all under his tent. One man, one hidden sin. And because of that, the ark didn't work. The presence did not protect. 36 men died because a single individual thought he could hide something from the God who dwelt between the cherubim. And Achan's punishment is brutal enough to understand the seriousness of what it meant to live in proximity to the ark. Joshua, Achan, his sons, his daughters, his oxen, his donkeys, his sheep, his tent, and everything he possessed were taken to the valley of Achor. The entire people stoned them, then burned everything, then covered them with a heap of stones. Achan didn't just die, he was erased. And only after that, only after the sin was removed from the midst of the people, did God say to Joshua, "Now go up against Ai." And Ai fell. The lesson was clear and no one could ignore it. The ark was not an automatic machine. It was not a talisman that worked independently of the behavior of those near it. The ark amplified everything. In the presence of obedience, it amplified power. In the presence of sin, it amplified destruction, and this destruction did not choose sides. But the episode that transformed the ark from an object of reverence into an object of pure terror for the Israelites themselves happened nearly 300 years later and is recorded in 1 Samuel chapters 4 to 6. It is one of the most cinematic narratives in the entire Bible, and it begins with the worst military decision Israel ever made. We are around 1104 BC. Israel is at war with the Philistines, a people who occupied the coastal strip of what is now the Gaza region. In the first battle, in a place called Ebenezer, Israel lost, 4,000 soldiers dead. And when the survivors returned to the camp, the elders asked a question that reveals how far they had distanced themselves from the original understanding of the ark. They asked, "Why has the Lord defeated us today before the Philistines?" And the solution they found was to go and get the ark from Shiloh. Think about what they were doing. They didn't ask God what they had done wrong. They didn't seek repentance. They didn't consult any prophet. They simply decided to bring the ark to the battlefield as if it were a good luck charm, as if the power was in the box and not in the God who dwelt above it. The ark arrived at the Israelite camp carried by the two sons of the high priest Eli, Hophni and Phinehas. And the text makes sure to record in previous chapters that these two men were corrupt. 1 Samuel says literally that they were sons of Belial and did not know the Lord. They stole the offerings of the people. They slept with the women who served at the entrance of the tabernacle. And now these two men were carrying the Ark of the Covenant into battle. When the Ark entered the camp, the people shouted so loudly that the earth shook. 1 Samuel 4:5. The shout was so intense that the Philistines in the opposite camp heard it and asked what was happening. And when they learned that the Ark of the God of Israel had arrived, something remarkable happened. They were afraid. 1 Samuel 4:7. Woe to us! Who will deliver us from the hand of these mighty gods? These are the gods who struck the Egyptians with all the plagues in the wilderness. The Philistines knew the reputation of the Ark. They had heard the stories. The terror was real, but then the Philistine commanders did something the Israelites didn't expect. Instead of fleeing, they strengthened themselves. 1 Samuel 4:9. Be strong and conduct yourselves like men, O Philistines, so that you do not become slaves to the Hebrews. And they attacked. The result was apocalyptic. Israel didn't just lose, they were massacred. 30,000 infantry soldiers dead, 30,000, a number almost 10 times greater than the previous defeat. Hophni and Phinehas, the two corrupt priests carrying the ark, dead. And the unthinkable happened. The Ark of the Covenant was captured, taken as war booty by the Philistines. The news reached Shiloh. A messenger ran from the battlefield with his clothes torn and dirt on his head. When he arrived, the high priest Eli, 98 years old, blind, sitting on a chair by the gate, was waiting for news. The messenger said 4 things. Israel fled, many died. Your 2 sons are dead, and the Ark of God has been taken. First, Samuel records that the instant Eli heard the mention of the ark, he fell backward from his chair, broke his neck, and died. It wasn't the news of the defeat that killed him. It wasn't the death of his sons. It was the ark. The mention of loss of the ark was what stopped his heart, and Phinehas' wife, pregnant upon hearing the news, went into labor. She gave birth to a boy, and with her last breath of life, named him Ichabod, which means the glory has departed from Israel, and she died. The ark was now in the hands of the Philistines, and what happened in the 7 months that followed is one of the strangest and most disturbing sequences in the entire Bible. The Philistines took the ark in triumph to the city of Ashdod, and as they did with all the war trophies captured from enemies, they placed the ark inside the temple of their primary god, Dagon, beside the statue of Dagon, as if the ark were a gift to the Philistine god, as if they were saying, "Our God defeated their God." The next morning, the priests of Dagon entered the temple and found the statue fallen, face down, with its face on the ground before the ark. The text of 1 Samuel 5:3 is clear. The statue was prostrate, as if in a position of worship before the ark. The priests lifted the statue and put it back in its place. The next morning, Dagon was on the floor again. But this time, 1 Samuel 5:4 adds a detail that is pure horror. Dagon's head and the palms of both his hands were cut off, thrown on the threshold of the temple gate. Separated from the body, only the torso remained. The god of the Philistines had been decapitated and amputated during the night in his own temple before a golden box. And the destruction didn't stop at the idol. 1 Samuel 5:6 says, "The hand of the Lord was heavy upon the inhabitants of Ashdod." Tumors, the Hebrew word ophalim, can be translated as tumors, swellings, or hemorrhoids, depending on the translation, began to appear in the population. A violent epidemic. And along with the tumors, something the Greek version of the Septuagint adds, and many translations omit: rats. A massive infestation of rats invaded the land and the crops. Tumors and rats. To any modern epidemiologist, the combination is immediately recognizable. These are the classic symptoms of the bubonic plague. The bacterium Yersinia pestis is transmitted by fleas from rodents and causes swelling in the lymph nodes, buboes, which is exactly what the text describes. If this connection is correct, the ark brought upon the Philistines a plague that would be the same one that would kill a third of Europe 3,000 years later, in the Black Death of the 14th century. The inhabitants of Ashdod didn't take long to understand. 1 Samuel 5:7, "The ark of the God of Israel must not stay with us, for his hand is severe upon us and upon Dagon our God." They decided to send the ark to another Philistine city. They chose Gath. Gath received the ark. The plague came with it. 1 Samuel 5:9, tumors on the men of Gath, from the least to the greatest. Total panic. Gath passed the ark to Ekron, and when the inhabitants of Ekron saw the ark arriving, the text says they cried out, literally shouted, "They have brought the ark of the God of Israel to us to kill us." 1 Samuel records absolute terror. No one wanted that object. The ark wandered among the Philistine cities like a bomb being passed from hand to hand. Every city that received it was devastated. It was 7 months. 7 months of systematic destruction. And finally, the Philistine leaders summoned their priests and diviners and asked the only question that mattered: what do we do with the Ark of the God of Israel? The response of the Philistine priests is fascinating from an anthropological point of view. They said, "Do not return it empty, send along with it a guilt offering." And the offering they prescribed reveals the exact level of suffering they had faced: 5 golden tumors and 5 golden rats, one for each major Philistine city. Gold replicas of the tumors that had devastated their bodies and the rats that had invaded their lands. It is a confession cast in precious metal. It is a pagan people admitting, through their own religious categories, that the God of the golden box was real and that they had made a catastrophic error. But the Philistine priests added something more: a test. 1 Samuel 6:7, "Take a new cart, 2 cows that are nursing and have never been put under a yoke. Tie the cows to the cart, place the ark on the cart, and take their calves away from them. Then release the cows without any driver. If they take the road to Beth Shemesh, toward Israelite territory, we will know it was the God of Israel who did all this evil to us. If not, if the cows go anywhere else, it was a coincidence." Think about the ingenuity of this test. Cows that have never pulled a cart wouldn't know what to do, and nursing cows, separated from their calves, would do only one thing by pure instinct: go back to their young. They would go in the opposite direction of Beth Shemesh. Any farmer knows this. The test was designed to fail. The Philistines were giving the ark a chance to prove that everything had been a natural coincidence. 1 Samuel. The cows took the straight road to Beth Shemesh. They did not turn to the right or to the left. They went lowing along the way, lowing for the calves they had left behind, fighting every animal instinct. But they did not stop. They went in a straight line up the road until they reached the territory of Israel. The princes of the Philistines followed behind, watching up to the border of the territory of Beth Shemesh. And there they stopped. They saw the cows enter the wheat fields of the Israelites, and they went back. The ark had returned. The men of Beth Shemesh were in the field reaping wheat when they saw the cart approaching. The joy was immediate. 1 Samuel says they lifted their eyes, saw the ark, and rejoiced. They stopped the cart, split the wood, and sacrificed the cows as an offering to God right there on a large stone that was in the field. The stone remained as a memorial. Up to here, the story is one of celebration. The ark is back. The presence of God is back among his people. Everything should be fine. But then the men of Beth Shemesh made the mistake. 1 Samuel. They looked inside the ark. They opened the lid. They looked. The text doesn't explain the motivation. Curiosity, unbelief, disrespect, it doesn't matter. The result is etched in the text with a brutality that leaves no room for soft interpretation. God struck the men of Beth Shemesh. The number recorded in the Masoretic Hebrew text is 50,070 men. The number is debated by scholars. Flavius Josephus, the first-century Jewish historian, records only 70, and many academics believe there was textual corruption in the number over centuries of manuscript copies. But even if it were only 70, the impact was devastating. An entire village decimated for opening a box. The reaction of the survivors is the most human possible. 1 Samuel. Who is able to stand before the Lord, this holy God? And to whom shall he go up away from us? The direct translation of the feeling, no one wants this thing here. Take it somewhere else. The same reaction as the Philistines, the same terror, the same question, what do we do with this ark? And here the deepest and most disturbing nature of the Ark of the Covenant is revealed. It made no distinction between friend and foe. The Philistine who placed it in Dagon's temple suffered. The Israelite who looked inside suffered. The corrupt priest who carried it died. The man who hid silver under his tent caused the defeat of an entire army. The ark was not partial. The ark was holy. And holiness, in the original biblical sense, does not mean gentle goodness. It means absolute separation. It means a standard that does not negotiate, does not flex, and does not forgive carelessness. The men of Beth Shemesh sent messengers to the inhabitants of Kiriath Jearim, a city in the hills a few miles away, and they said essentially, "Come get the ark, we don't want it anymore." Kiriath Jearim accepted. The ark was taken to the house of a man named Abinadab on a hill. His son Eleazar was consecrated to guard it, and the ark stayed there, in silence, in a private house on a hill in a secondary city. 20 years, no temple, no tabernacle, no procession. The most powerful object in human history, kept as it were family furniture in a basement. 20 years in which no one dared move it, no one dared use it, no one dared even talk much about it. Until a man emerged obsessed with the idea of bringing the ark back to the center of Israel's life. A man who loved the ark with an almost irrational love. A man who would dance almost naked before it in the streets of the capital, not caring what anyone thought. This man was David, and his story with the ark contains one of the most shocking and most misunderstood moments in the entire biblical narrative. A moment when joy turned into death in a matter of seconds, and the question David asked that day is the same question any rational person would ask before the Ark of the Covenant. How is it possible to have the presence of God near you without dying? David was not king by chance. He had been a shepherd, a fugitive, a guerrilla, a poet, and a general before reaching the throne. He had killed Goliath with a stone. He had lived in caves, fleeing from Saul for years. He had unified the tribes, and now finally installed as king of all Israel. With Jerusalem as his new capital, David looked around and realized what was missing: the ark. Jerusalem was the political center, but without the ark, it was not the spiritual center. And David understood, perhaps better than any other leader of Israel, that a people without a spiritual center is a people that fragments. He gathered 30,000 chosen men of Israel. 30,000. It wasn't a transport operation, it was a national procession, an event that should mark the beginning of a new era. The ark would be brought from the house of Abinadab in Kiriath Jearim to Jerusalem, to the city of David, to the heart of the kingdom. 2 Samuel 6:3. They put the ark of God on a new cart, a cart built specifically for the occasion, new, clean, dedicated. Uzzah and Ahio, sons of Abinadab, the men who had grown up in the same house as the ark, who probably passed it every day since childhood, guided the cart. David and the whole house of Israel played before the ark. Harps, lyres, tambourines, cymbals, sistrums, music at maximum volume, total celebration, 30,000 voices singing, the king dancing, the ark finally on the move after 20 years of silence. Everything was perfect, everything seemed right. And then they reached the threshing floor of Nacon, a geographical detail that matters. Threshing floors were platforms of flattened stone, usually on hilltops where wheat was threshed. The surrounding terrain used to be irregular, and when the cart reached that threshing floor, the oxen stumbled. The cart tilted, the ark swayed, and Uzzah did the most natural, most instinctive, most humanly understandable thing someone could do. He reached out his hand and steadied the ark so it wouldn't fall. 2 Samuel 6:7. The anger of the Lord burned against Uzzah, and God struck him there for his irreverence. And Uzzah died right there beside the ark of God. He died instantly for holding the ark, for preventing it from falling to the ground, for doing exactly what any person would do by reflex. The music stopped, the cymbals went silent, 30,000 men froze, and David, the man who had faced Goliath, who had survived Saul, who had conquered Jerusalem, David became angry, and he became afraid. 2 Samuel 6:8 says David was indignant because the Lord had broken out against Uzzah. The Hebrew word for David's reaction, kara, is the same used to describe intense rage. David was furious with God, and immediately after he was terrified. 2 Samuel 6:9. How can the ark of the Lord come to me? This phrase carries the weight of all the history we have already told. David knew what had happened in Beth Shemesh. He knew what had happened with the Philistines. He knew of the defeat at Ai, of Eli's sons dead on the battlefield. And now, before his own eyes, a man he probably knew, a man who was doing something apparently good, lay dead on the ground. David's question was not rhetorical, it was existential. How does anyone bring this object into their city without turning the entire city into a cemetery? David cancelled the operation. The ark would not go to Jerusalem, not that day. Instead, he ordered the cart be diverted to the house of a man named Obed-Edom, a Gittite. The text doesn't explain why Obed-Edom accepted. And honestly, considering the history, accepting the ark into your house required a courage bordering on madness. Obed-Edom received it, and the ark stayed in his house for 3 months. And here the text does something unexpected. Instead of destruction, instead of death, instead of plagues, 2 Samuel says simply that the Lord blessed Obed-Edom and his entire household. Blessed. The same ark that had killed Uzzah, devastated 5 Philistine cities, decimated Beth Shemesh, and toppled an idol. This same ark brought blessing upon Obed-Edom. The question is inevitable. Why did Obed-Edom survive and Uzzah did not? What did Obed-Edom do differently? The biblical text does not give an explicit answer. But what happened between Uzzah's death and David's second attempt reveals something crucial. David studied. David researched. 1 Chronicles records. David's own words months later, because you did not carry it the first time, the Lord our God broke out against us because we did not seek him according to the ordinance. The ordinance. The rules, the instructions that had been given to Moses on Sinai, written in detail in the book of Numbers. The ark was to be transported by the Levites from the family of Kohath, carried on poles on their shoulders. Never touched directly, never placed on a cart. And what had David done? He had copied the method of the Philistines. He had put the ark on a cart pulled by oxen, exactly as the Philistines had returned it decades earlier. It worked for the Philistines because they didn't have the instructions. They didn't know the rules, but Israel knew, or should have known, and that difference between genuine ignorance and willful negligence was the difference between life and death when it came to the ark. 3 months later, David tried again. But this time everything was different. 1 Chronicles 15 details the meticulous preparation. David summoned the priests and Levites. He organized the families. He designated who would carry the ark on their shoulders with the poles exactly as prescribed. He designated singers, instrumentalists, gatekeepers, every role covered, every detail respected. And this time, 2 Samuel records something extraordinary. After the Levites took 6 steps carrying the ark, David sacrificed an ox and a fattened calf. 6 steps. He stopped, sacrificed, waited. And when no one died, when the 6 steps were taken in safety, David understood that the presence was moving with them and not against them. And from there, David exploded. 2 Samuel. And David danced with all his might before the Lord. The Hebrew word for what David did, karah, does not describe a ceremonial dance. It describes jumping, spinning, whirling, a total physical movement, violent, ecstatic. And David was wearing only a linen ephod, a light short piece that was basically priestly undergarment. The king of Israel, the conqueror of Jerusalem, the most famous warrior of his generation, was semi-covered, sweating, jumping, shouting in the middle of a public procession. And he didn't care, trumpets sounding, the people shouting, the ark advancing on the shoulders of the Levites, meter by meter, toward the city. David distributed bread, meat, and raisin cakes to all the people. Every man and every woman of Israel present received food from the king's hand. And when the ark was finally placed inside the tent David had prepared for it in Jerusalem, the king offered burnt offerings and peace offerings before the Lord. But the arrival of the ark in Jerusalem had a personal cost that the text records with brutal honesty. When David returned home, Michal, Saul's daughter, David's wife, looked through the window and saw the king jumping and dancing. And the text says she despised him in her heart. 2 Samuel, Michal went out to meet David and said, with cutting sarcasm, "How glorious the king of Israel was today, uncovering himself before the eyes of his servants' maids, as one of the vulgar fellows shamelessly uncovers himself." The phrase is poisonous. Michal was saying, "You, the king, behaved like a half-naked clown in front of the whole people. Where is your dignity?" And David's response is one of the most revealing speeches in the entire Bible about what it meant to be in the presence of the ark. 2 Samuel, "It was before the Lord who chose me instead of your father and all his house to appoint me ruler over the people of the Lord, over Israel. Therefore I will play music before the Lord." Translating, I wasn't dancing for the people. I wasn't dancing to impress anyone. I was before the ark. And before the ark, there is no royal dignity. There is no hierarchy. There is no political decorum. There is only the human response before the presence of God. And if that response is to jump, spin, and shout like a madman, then that is what you do. Michal, the text says, had no children until the day of her death. The judgment is recorded without comment, without explanation, without elaboration. Only the dry consequence of having despised what happened before the ark. The ark was now in Jerusalem, inside a tent, and David did something no Israelite leader had done before. He organized continuous worship before the ark. 1 Chronicles 16 records that David appointed Levites to minister before the ark permanently. Singers, instrumentalists, psalms composed specifically to be sung before the presence. Asaph and his brothers were appointed to play cymbals. Benaiah and Jahaziel, trumpets before the ark of God continually, not on Saturdays, not on special feasts, every day. David created the first system of continuous worship in history. Uninterrupted music before a golden-covered wooden box inside a tent in Jerusalem. And then David had the idea that would change everything. 2 Samuel 7. David was sitting in his palace, a cedar palace he himself had built, with wood imported from Lebanon, and looked at the tent where the ark was kept. And he said to the prophet Nathan, "Look, I dwell in a house of cedar, but the ark of God dwells inside curtains." The intention was clear. David wanted to build a temple, a permanent, magnificent structure worthy of the object he considered the most important in the world. Nathan initially supported the idea, but that night, God spoke to Nathan, and the answer was not what anyone expected. God said to David, "You will not build a house for me, but I will build a house for you." And the house God promised David was not a building. It was a dynasty, a lineage, a throne that would last forever. The promise is known as the Davidic covenant, and for Christianity, it is the promise that culminates in Jesus. For Judaism, it is the promise that still awaits fulfillment in the Messiah. And it all began because a man looked at a tent and thought the ark deserved more. David did not build the temple, but he spent the rest of his life preparing everything so that his son would do it. 1 Chronicles 22 records the scale of the preparation. 100,000 talents of gold, 1,000,000 talents of silver, bronze and iron beyond measure, countless cedar wood, workers, stonecutters, masons, carpenters, artisans of all specialties gathered before a single stone was even cut. David did not live to see the temple, but he designed every detail. And when Solomon, his son, finally took over the construction, he was following the plans David had drawn, plans that, according to 1 Chronicles, came directly from the hand of the Lord, like the plans Moses received for the tabernacle centuries before. The construction of Solomon's temple lasted 7 years. 1 Kings 6 describes the dimensions: 60 cubits long, 20 wide and 30 high. Converting to modern measurements, approximately 90 feet long, 30 wide and 45 high. It wasn't gigantic by modern standards. A medium-sized church in any city could have similar dimensions. But what those walls contained was something the ancient world had never seen. The interior was lined entirely with cedar. No stone was visible. And over the cedar, gold. 1 Kings. The entire altar covered in gold, the walls covered in gold, the floor covered in gold, the doors covered in gold. Cherubim of olive wood with a 15-foot wingspan each, covered in gold. Every hinge, every chain, every ornamental detail, gold. Solomon's temple was literally a gold box inside a stone box. And inside the innermost room, the Holy of Holies, the Debir, there was only one object, a wooden box covered in gold with 2 cherubim on the lid, carrying inside it 2 stone tablets written by the finger of God. The dedication of the temple is recorded in 1 Kings 8, and it is one of the most cinematic moments of the Old Testament. Solomon summoned all the elders of Israel, all the heads of the tribes, all princes of the families. The priests carried the ark from David's tent to the temple, and the number of sheep and oxen sacrificed along the way was so great they could not be counted. Literally, the text says they could not be recorded. They were so numerous. The priests entered the Holy of Holies and placed the ark under the wings of the giant olive wood cherubim. The poles of the ark were so long that their ends could be seen from the holy place, the preceding room, but not from outside. And then 1 Kings 8:9 records a detail that is simultaneously a confirmation and a loss. There was nothing in the ark except the 2 tablets of stone, nothing else. The jar of manna that Hebrews 9:4 mentions, gone. Aaron's rod that blossomed, gone. At some point during the turbulent centuries, perhaps during the capture by the Philistines, perhaps during the 20 years in Kiriath Jearim, these objects were lost. Only the tablets remained, the original law, the words written directly by the finger of God on Sinai. And then it happened, 1 Kings. When the priests came out of the Holy of Holies, the cloud filled the house of the Lord, the same cloud that had descended on Sinai, the same cloud that had covered the tabernacle in the desert, the same presence that traveled with Israel for 40 years. Now it filled Solomon's temple with such absolute density that 1 Kings says the priests could not stand to minister. They could not stay on their feet. They could not continue their rituals. The presence was so intense, so physically overwhelming, that men trained for sacred service had to leave. Solomon looked at the cloud consuming the interior of the temple and said, "The Lord said that he would dwell in thick darkness." Thick darkness. God's presence was not light. It was a darkness so concentrated it had weight, a darkness that pushed out any human being. The ark had found its home. After centuries of desert, of temporary tents, of private houses, of captures and returns, the ark rested in a structure built exclusively for it, in the center of the capital of the most prosperous kingdom Israel had ever known. And for approximately 370 years, there it stayed, in the silence of the Holy of Holies, in the absolute darkness of a room without windows, without torches, without any human light source. Visited by a single person once a year on the Day of Atonement, when the high priest entered with blood and incense, and even then he entered with fear. But empires do not last forever. And what happened to the ark after those 370 years is the greatest archaeological mystery in human history. Because at some point between Solomon's reign and the destruction of Jerusalem, the Ark of the Covenant vanished, and no one knows where it went, Let's be precise about what we know. Solomon died around 930 BC. The destruction of the temple by Nebuchadnezzar happened in 586 BC. This gives us a window of approximately 344 years. At some point within that window, the most important object in Israel's history simply disappeared. And the most disturbing thing is not that the ark vanished, it's that almost no one in the biblical text seems to have noticed. Or if they did, they didn't record it. The silence is deafening. But before we enter the mystery of the disappearance, we need to understand what happened to Israel during those 3.5 centuries, because the context explains a lot. When Solomon died, his son Rehoboam took the throne, and immediately, catastrophically, he did everything wrong. The northern tribes came to ask for tax relief. Solomon had heavily taxed the people to finance his buildings. Rehoboam consulted the elders, who recommended moderation. Then he consulted the young men who had grown up with him, who recommended an iron fist. Rehoboam chose the young men. 1 Kings. My father made your yoke heavy, but I will add to your yoke. My father disciplined you with whips, but I will discipline you with scorpions. 10 of the 12 tribes separated. Israel split into 2 kingdoms. The northern kingdom, Israel, with 10 tribes, capital in Samaria. The southern kingdom, Judah, with 2 tribes, capital in Jerusalem. And the ark stayed in Jerusalem, in the temple, in the southern kingdom. The northern kingdom never had access to the ark again. And Jeroboam, the first king of the north, knew this was a huge political problem. If the people continued pilgrimaging to Jerusalem to worship before the ark, eventually their loyalty would return to the house of David. So Jeroboam did something the biblical text considers the foundational sin of the northern kingdom. He built 2 golden calves, one in Dan in the far north and another in Bethel in the far south of his territory. And he said to the people, "Behold your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt." The same phrase, exactly the same phrase Aaron had said in the desert centuries earlier when he built the golden calf at Sinai, as if history were stuck in a cycle. Meanwhile, in the southern kingdom, the ark remained in the temple, but the situation in Judah was not much better. 5 years after Solomon's death, only 5 years, Pharaoh Shishak of Egypt invaded Jerusalem. 1 Kings 14:25 and 26 records that Shishak took the treasures of the house of the Lord and the treasures of the king's house. He took everything. He took the gold shield Solomon had made. He looted the temple. But the text does not mention the ark among the objects taken. And here we need to be careful. The absence of mention does not necessarily mean the ark was safe. It only means the text doesn't mention it. But considering the ark was the most important object in the temple, it is reasonable to assume that if it had been taken, the text would have recorded it. Probably Shishak looted the external objects, the treasures in the side rooms, the ornaments, the accessible gold pieces, but did not penetrate the Holy of Holies, or he penetrated and did not dare touch the ark, or he didn't find it in the absolute darkness of that room. After Shishak, what follows is a succession of kings in Judah that varies between faithfulness and complete apostasy. And some of these kings did things inside the temple that are hard to believe. Ahaz, who reigned around 735 to 715 BC, is one of the worst. 2 Kings 16 records that Ahaz visited Damascus, saw a pagan altar that pleased him, had a copy made, and placed it inside Solomon's temple. He moved the original bronze altar to the side. He used the Lord's temple to consult the king of Assyria. And 2 Chronicles says, Ahaz closed the doors of the house of the Lord. He closed them. He locked the temple. No one entered, no one left. No sacrifice, no worship. The doors of the place where the ark rested were locked by the king of Judah himself. And Manasseh was worse, much worse. Manasseh reigned for 55 years, the longest reign of any king of Judah, and during most of that time he transformed the temple into something Solomon would not recognize. 2 Kings 21 lists what Manasseh did. He built altars for Baal inside the temple. He made an image of Asherah, a Canaanite sacred pole, and placed it inside the house of the Lord, the same temple Solomon had dedicated with fire from heaven. Manasseh placed pagan idols inside it. He built altars for all the host of heaven in the two courts of the temple. He practiced divination. He consulted mediums. He made his son pass through the fire, human sacrifice. And the text says, Manasseh shed so much innocent blood that it filled Jerusalem from one end to the other. Now think about what this means for the Ark, the most sacred object of Israel, resting in the Holy of Holies, while a few meters away, in the same complex, Baal idols were worshipped, Asherah poles were erected, and children were sacrificed. It is during this period that many scholars believe the Ark may have been removed, not by enemies, not by invaders, but by faithful priests who saw what was happening inside the temple and decided the Ark needed to be protected, not from foreign armies, but from the King of Israel himself. This theory gains weight when we look at what happened next, Josiah, the last great king of Judah. Josiah took the throne at 8 years old and initiated a religious reform that was unprecedented. 2 Chronicles 34 describes Josiah purifying the temple, destroying pagan altars, burning Asherah poles, demolishing high places. And in the middle of this reform, in 2 Chronicles 35:3, a phrase appears that is possibly the most important clue about the fate of the Ark. Josiah said to the Levites, "Put the holy Ark in the house that Solomon the son of David, king of Israel, built. Put the Ark in the house." This means the Ark was not in the house. The Ark was not in the temple when Josiah gave that order. It had been removed. At some point, possibly during Manasseh's reign, possibly before, someone had taken the Ark out of the Holy of Holies. The question is, where to and why? If loyal priests removed the Ark to protect it from Manasseh's profanation, they would have to hide it in a safe, accessible, but secret place. And the most obvious candidate was literally beneath their feet. The Temple Mount is not a solid mountain. It is a geological complex full of natural caves, tunnels, cisterns, and underground passages. Some of these structures predate Solomon's temple itself. Others were excavated over centuries for water storage, emergency passages, or storage. Jewish tradition, preserved in the Talmud, specifically in the treatise Yoma, states that there were secret chambers under the temple. And a rabbinic tradition dating back to the Second Temple period states that King Josiah, knowing the temple would eventually be destroyed, hid the Ark in one of these underground chambers. The Babylonian Talmud, treatise Yoma 53b-54a, specifically discusses where the Ark was hidden. But that is only one of the theories. There are at least 4 main traditions about what happened to the Ark, and each has evidence, defenders, and problems. The first is what we just described, the underground theory. The Ark is under the Temple Mount, in some sealed chamber, waiting to be found. The obvious problem is that the Temple Mount is today one of the most politically sensitive places on the planet. The Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque are built over it. Any archaeological excavation on site is politically impossible, and the few attempts made over centuries generated diplomatic crises. In 1981, Rabbi Yehuda Getz, responsible for the Western Wall area, found what he believed was a passage leading directly under the Temple Mount. When workers began to clear the way, the Islamic Waqf, the religious authority that manages the site, sealed the passage with concrete within hours. And to this day, no one knows what was on the other side. The second theory is the oldest and most elaborate of all. It is the Ethiopian tradition. And it doesn't say the Ark disappeared. It says the Ark was taken to Ethiopia, and that it is still there. The text that supports this tradition is the Kebra Nagast, the Book of the Glory of Kings. a 14th century Ethiopian manuscript that tells the story of the Queen of Sheba, her visit to Solomon, and the son born from that encounter. According to the Kebra Nagast, the Queen of Sheba, called Makeda in Ethiopian tradition, traveled to Jerusalem to test Solomon's wisdom. The visit is confirmed by the Bible. 1 Kings 10 describes the meeting in detail, but the Kebra Nagast adds what the Bible omits. During the stay, Solomon and Makeda had a son. His name was Menelik. According to tradition, Menelik grew up in Ethiopia but traveled to Jerusalem as a young man to meet his father. Solomon received him with honor and wanted him to stay as heir, but Menelik decided to return to Ethiopia, and here the story becomes extraordinary. When Menelik left, he or his companions took the Ark of the Covenant with him. In some versions, Solomon allowed it. In others, it was a theft, and in others still, God himself orchestrated the transfer. The Ark, according to this tradition, traveled from Jerusalem to Egypt, went down the Nile, reached Ethiopia, and was placed in a sanctuary in the city of Aksum, the ancient capital of the Aksumite Empire. And according to the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, the Ark is still there, today, in a small chapel in the complex of the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion, in Aksum, in northern Ethiopia. There is a guardian, a single monk, chosen for the lifelong post, who is the only person in the world authorized to see the Ark. He never leaves the chapel complex. Never. He lives there until he dies, and before dying, he designates his successor. No scholar, no archaeologist, no head of state has ever been allowed to see the object inside that chapel. No photograph, no filming, no scientific analysis. The only thing the outside world knows is what the guardians say. The Ark is there. It is real, and it will not be shown to anyone. For the Ethiopians, this is not an archaeological issue. It is a matter of faith. Ethiopia considers itself the legitimate guardian of the Ark for 3,000 years. Each of the more than 35,000 Ethiopian Orthodox churches has a replica of the Ark, called a tablet, inside it. The tablet is the most sacred object of each church, kept in the Holy of Holies, visible only to priests. Ethiopian civilization in many ways was built around the presence of the Ark. But the Ethiopian theory has serious historical problems. The Kebra Nagast was compiled in the 14th century, more than 2,000 years after the events it describes. There is no reference to the transfer of the Ark to Ethiopia in biblical, Assyrian, Babylonian, or Egyptian sources of the relevant period. And the chronology is problematic. If Menelik took the Ark during Solomon's reign, how was the Ark still in the temple decades later when Pharaoh Shishak invaded? How did Josiah order the Ark returned to the temple centuries later if it was already in Ethiopia? Defenders of the Ethiopian theory respond in various ways. Some suggest what remained in the temple after Menelik's departure was a copy. Others propose alternative chronologies. But for most academic historians, the Ethiopian theory is more national theology than factual history. The third theory is perhaps the most painful. It is the theory of destruction. And it says simply that the Ark was destroyed when Nebuchadnezzar razed Jerusalem in 586 BC. 2 Kings 25 describes the destruction with meticulous detail. The Babylonians broke the bronze pillars of the temple. They broke the bronze stands. They broke the bronze sea, that huge basin in the courtyard. They took all the gold, all the silver, all the bronze. They took the pots, the shovels, the snuffers, the basins, the censers. Every utilitarian object of the temple is listed individually among the spoils. And then they burned the temple. They burned the house of the Lord, the king's house, and all the houses of Jerusalem. Everything great, everything significant, set on fire. Now, the list of objects taken by Nebuchadnezzar is extremely detailed. Bronze pots are mentioned, snuffers are mentioned, but the Ark of the Covenant, the most valuable, most famous, most gold-covered object of the entire temple, does not appear on the list. It is not mentioned among the spoils taken to Babylon. It is not mentioned among the destroyed objects. It simply is not mentioned. This absence allows for two opposite interpretations. First, the ark is not mentioned because it was no longer there. It had been removed before, hidden, transferred, protected. Josiah or someone before him had already arranged it. Second, the ark is not mentioned because it was destroyed along with everything else and didn't deserve special mention in a Babylonian military report. It was wood and gold. The gold was melted and taken, the wood burned. End of story. For many historians, this is the most likely explanation, simplest, most consistent with what we know about conquest practices in the ancient world. The Babylonians had no reverence for the ark. For them, it was a religious object of a conquered people, and religious objects of conquered peoples were routinely destroyed or melted down for precious metal extraction. But there is a detail that complicates this theory. When Cyrus, king of Persia, conquered Babylon and allowed the Jews to return to Jerusalem, he returned the temple objects. Ezra 1:7 records that Cyrus ordered the vessels of the house of the Lord that Nebuchadnezzar had brought from Jerusalem to be brought out. And Ezra 1:9 and 10 lists these objects with precision: 30 gold platters, 1,000 silver platters, 29 knives, 30 gold bowls, 410 silver bowls, and 1,000 other vessels. Total 5,400 gold and silver objects. The list is meticulous, but the ark is not on it. If the Babylonians had taken the ark as spoil, it should have been among the objects returned by Cyrus. It isn't. If it was melted down, the gold would not be identifiable as the ark decades later. But if it was never taken to Babylon, if it had already disappeared before 586, then its absence from Cyrus's list makes perfect sense. It simply wasn't among the spoils, because it wasn't in the temple when the Babylonians arrived. The fourth theory is the most mysterious of all. It appears in the second book of Maccabees, chapter 2, verses 4 to 8. A text Protestants consider apocryphal, Catholics consider deuterocanonical, and historians consider, at the very least, intriguing. According to this text, the prophet Jeremiah, who was alive and active in Jerusalem during the final years before the Babylonian destruction, received a divine order, and he acted. 2 Maccabees 2:4 says Jeremiah ordered the tabernacle and the ark to accompany him. And he went out toward the mountain where Moses had climbed to see God's inheritance, Mount Nebo, in present-day Jordan, on the other side of the Jordan River. And when Jeremiah reached Mount Nebo, he found a cave, and he placed the tabernacle, the ark, and the altar of incense inside it, and he sealed the entrance. Some of those who accompanied him tried to mark the way so they could return and find the place again, but they couldn't. Jeremiah rebuked them and said, and this is one of the most loaded phrases in all of biblical and extra-biblical canon, "The place shall remain unknown until God gathers his people together again and shows his mercy. Then the Lord will disclose these things, and the glory of the Lord will appear as it appeared in the time of Moses." The ark, according to this tradition, is in a cave on Mount Nebo, hidden by Jeremiah, sealed by God, and it will only be revealed when God decides it is time, not before. No archaeological expedition will find it. No excavation will unearth it. It is hidden not by stones and dirt, but by divine will. For those who believe in this tradition, the ark is not lost. It is kept. 4 theories. Under the Temple Mount, in Ethiopia, destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar, hidden by Jeremiah on Mount Nebo, and none of them can be proven, and none of them can be definitively refuted. There are other smaller theories. The Ark was taken to Rome by Titus in 70 AD. The Ark is in the Vatican. The Ark was taken to Ireland by an Egyptian princess. The Ark is buried under the hill of Golgotha. Some are pure folklore. Others have threads of evidence too thin to support any weight. But the fact is that the Ark of the Covenant, an object of wood and gold built more than 3,000 years ago, disappeared from history without leaving a confirmable trace. And this disappearance is not just an archaeological mystery, it is a theological mystery. Because if the Ark was truly the place where God's presence dwelt on earth, the contact point between the infinite and the finite, then what does it mean it vanished? The Second Temple gives us a clue about how the Jews themselves dealt with this loss. When the exiles returned from Babylon and rebuilt the temple, a process described in Ezra and Nehemiah, the new temple had everything the first had: altar, courtyards, holy place, holy of holies. But the holy of holies of the Second Temple was empty. There was no ark. There were no cherubim. There was no mercy seat. The most sacred room in the most sacred place in the world was an empty stone cube. The Talmud confirms this. Treatise Yoma 21b lists 5 things that existed in the first temple and were missing in the second: the ark, the sacred fire, the Shekinah, the visible presence of God, the Holy Spirit, and the Urim and Thummim. 5 absences, and the first on the list is the Ark. On the Day of Atonement, when the high priest entered the Holy of Holies of the Second Temple, he sprinkled blood not on the mercy seat, because there was no mercy seat, but on the bare stone of the floor, a stone called Even Hashatiah, the foundation stone, which tradition says is the exact spot where the Ark originally rested. The high priest sprinkled blood over an absence. He performed the most sacred ritual of the year before a void. And here is where the story of the Ark transforms into something larger than archaeology. Because the Second Temple was not a lesser temple. It was not a temporary substitute. Herod the Great, the same Herod who tried to kill the baby Jesus, invested 46 years and almost incalculable resources to transform the Second Temple into one of the most impressive structures of the ancient world. The historian Josephus describes Herod's temple with a reverence bordering on ecstasy. The stones of the outer wall weighed up to 500 tons each. The courtyard could hold 400,000 people. The doors were covered in gold and silver. The entire building, seen from afar, looked like a mountain of snow crowned with gold, because the walls were of white marble and the roof was covered with gold plates that reflected the desert sun with an intensity that, according to Josephus, forced people to look away. It was the largest architectural project in the entire region. And in the center of all that, in the heart of that mountain of marble and gold, in the innermost room, the most protected, the most sacred, there was nothing. An empty space, a stone on the floor, and the memory of something that had been there and was no longer. But the Jews continued. They continued offering sacrifices. They continued celebrating the Day of Atonement. They continued entering the Holy of Holies once a year. They continued treating that empty space as the most sacred place on earth. And this reveals something profound about the nature of faith, that it does not depend on the visible object, that the absence of the ark did not mean the absence of God, or maybe it did, because that is exactly the theological tension that dominated Second Temple Judaism. Some rabbis argued that the Shekinah, the manifest presence of God, never left the temple site, even without the ark. Others said that without the ark, God's full presence no longer dwelt among men in the same way, and others still saw in the absence of the ark a sign. The old covenant was transforming into something new, something that no longer depended on a physical object in a stone room. This temple, the empty temple, the temple without an ark, lasted until 70 AD. When the Roman legions of Titus besieged Jerusalem and destroyed it with a brutality that to this day is difficult to process. Josephus, who was Jewish but wrote for Rome, documented the siege in details that make anyone swallow hard. The famine inside the city was so extreme that mothers cooked their own children. It's not a metaphor. Josephus cites names, he describes scenes. When the Romans finally broke through the walls, The bloodbath was total. Josephus estimates that 1,100,000 people died during the siege, a number modern historians consider exaggerated, but even the most conservative estimates speak of hundreds of thousands. And the temple, the great temple of Herod, with its 500-ton stones and its golden gates, was set on fire. Titus, according to Josephus, actually did not want to destroy the temple. He wanted to preserve it as a trophy, as a demonstration of the greatness of Rome that could conquer even the God of the Jews. But in the heat of battle, a soldier threw a torch through a window, and the fire spread. The gold that lined the inner walls melted and ran between the stones. And later, when the fire went out, the Roman soldiers dismantled the temple stone by stone to extract the gold solidified in the cracks. That is why not one stone was left upon another. It wasn't just destruction, it was mining. Now, the Arch of Titus, which still stands in Rome, in the Roman Forum, a few meters from the Colosseum, shows in relief the spoils of the temple being carried in triumphal procession through Rome. You can clearly see the menorah, the seven-branched candelabrum, being carried by Roman soldiers. You can see the table of the showbread. You can see silver trumpets, but the ark does not appear. If the ark still existed in some form inside the temple complex, even hidden in underground chambers, the Romans would likely have found it. They dismantled the entire temple. They excavated between the stones looking for melted gold. They searched every room, every passage, every storage area, and they did not find the ark. Or if they found it, they didn't recognize it. Or they didn't care enough to represent it on the Arch of Titus, along with the other trophies. But that seems unlikely. The ark was famous in the ancient world. Its reputation went beyond the borders of Israel. The Romans knew what it was. If they had found it, they would have displayed it. The most likely conclusion is that when Titus destroyed the temple in 70 AD, the ark had not been there for centuries. It had already disappeared much earlier. It was already an absence within an absence. And after 70 AD, the search for the ark became something else. It ceased to be a matter of priests hiding a sacred object and became an obsession that crossed entire civilizations. The Knights Templar, that Christian military order founded in 1119 AD, established their headquarters exactly over the Temple Mount. 9 knights, 9 years, living and working over the ruins of Solomon's Temple. The official version is that they protected Christian pilgrims in the Holy Land. But since the 19th century, a persistent theory states that the Templars were, in fact, excavating, looking for something under the Temple Mount, and that they found it. In 1867, a team of British engineers, led by Lieutenant Charles Warren of the Palestine Exploration Fund, mapped a network of tunnels under the Temple Mount. Some of these tunnels showed signs of medieval excavation. Templar tools were found in the tunnels. The knights had been down there. But what they found, if they found anything, no one knows. The Templar legend fueled centuries of speculation. The Ark is in Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland. The Ark is under Chartres Cathedral in France. The Ark was taken to Oak Island in Canada. Each of these theories has its passionate defenders and its published books. None has serious archaeological evidence, but the modern search, the search with methodology, with equipment, with scientific intent, began in earnest in the 20th century. And one name stands out above all others, not for the quality of his discoveries, but for the audacity of his claims: Ron Wyatt, an anesthetist from Nashville, Tennessee, with no training in archaeology, who between the 1970s and 1990s claimed to have found practically every important biblical relic. Noah's Ark on Mount Ararat, Pharaoh's chariot wheels at the bottom of the Red Sea, the true Mount Sinai in Saudi Arabia, the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, and in 1982 the Ark of the Covenant. According to Wyatt, he was excavating in the area of Calvary, the traditional site of Jesus' crucifixion, outside the walls of the old city of Jerusalem, when he found an underground chamber, And inside that chamber, covered by animal skins, was the Ark of the Covenant. Wyatt claimed the Ark was directly below the site of the crucifixion, and that there was a crack in the rock going from the site of the cross down to the chamber where the Ark rested, and that through that crack the blood of Jesus Christ had dripped and fallen onto the mercy seat of the Ark. According to Wyatt, he collected samples of that blood and sent them for laboratory analysis. And the result, according to him, showed that the blood had only 24 chromosomes, 23 from the mother and only one Y chromosome, with no human paternal genetic contribution, evidence, according to Wyatt, of a virginal birth. The scientific and archaeological community completely rejected Wyatt's claims. No laboratory confirmed the tests. No professional archaeologist verified the chamber. The Israeli Antiquities Authorities declared there is no evidence of any of Wyatt's discoveries. But in popular biblical archaeology circles, Wyatt became a polarizing name, a hero to some, a charlatan to others. And Wyatt was not the only one. In 1911, a group led by British aristocrat Montague Parker tried to excavate under the Temple Mount in search of the Ark. The expedition, funded by investors who literally hoped to profit from the discovery, worked secretly during the night, bribing Ottoman guards for access. When the local population discovered that foreigners were excavating under the sacred site, there were violent riots in Jerusalem. Parker and his team had to flee in haste, and the incident almost caused an international crisis. They found nothing. In 2008, a British researcher named Tudor Parfitt published a book arguing that the Ark had been taken to Zimbabwe and that a ritual object called Ngoma Lungundu, a sacred drum of the Lemba people, was in fact a direct descendant of the Ark. Carbon dating of the object showed it was about 600 years old, ancient but not ancient enough. And genetic tests of the Lemba people revealed something unexpected. A significant proportion of Lemba men carried genetic markers of the J haplotype associated with the Jewish priestly lineage, the Kohanim. There was a real connection between the Lemba and ancient Israel, but the link to the Ark remained speculative. The truth is that with each passing decade, the possibility of finding the original Ark diminishes. If it was made of acacia wood, as the Bible describes, 3,000 years is more than enough time for the wood to completely decompose, unless it is in exceptional conditions of preservation, like a sealed, dry, and stable environment. The gold would survive naturally, but gold without context is just gold. If someone found gold plate in a cave in Jordan, how would they prove they were from the Ark and not from any other object? Without inscriptions, without identifiable marks, without clear archaeological context, even a genuine discovery could be impossible to verify. And here is where the story of the Ark meets a question that goes beyond any excavation or expedition. A question that is not about the past, but about the future. Because for millions of people, Jews, Christians, and Muslims, the Ark of the Covenant is not just a lost artifact, it is a centerpiece of prophecy. In Jewish tradition, the rediscovery of the Ark is linked to the coming of the Messiah and the construction of the Third Temple. The Temple Institute in Jerusalem, an organization founded in 1987, has already reconstructed more than 70 of the sacred vessels needed for temple service. It has already manufactured the high priest's vestments, the breastplate with the 12 stones, the ephod, the blue robe with pomegranates and gold bells. It has already identified men of the priestly lineage through DNA tests. It has already trained priests in sacrifice rituals. Everything is ready, according to them. Everything except two things: the location, which is occupied by the Dome of the Rock, and the Ark. In Christian tradition, the Ark reappears in the last book of the Bible. Revelation says, "Then God's temple in heaven was opened, and within his temple was seen the Ark of his covenant." It is an extraordinary image. The Ark that disappeared from earth is seen in heaven. not found in a cave, not unearthed in an excavation, but revealed in the celestial temple of which the earthly temple was only a copy. For many Christian theologians, this passage suggests that the physical search for the ark is ultimately irrelevant. The earthly ark was a shadow. The original was always in heaven. And what it represented, God's direct presence among men, manifested in a completely different way. Not in a wooden and gold box inside a stone room, but in a person. The Gospel of John, chapter 1, verse 14, "And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us." The Greek word used by John is eskenosen, which literally means pitched his tent, tabernacled. It is the same image, God dwelling in the midst of the people, not in a box, in a person. In Islam, the Ark, called Tabut al-Sakina, also has a prophetic role. The Quran mentions the Ark in Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 248, as a sign of royal legitimacy. And later, Islamic traditions associate the reappearance of the Ark with end times events, specifically the coming of the Mahdi, the messianic figure of Islam. According to some of these traditions, the Ark will be discovered in the waters of the Sea of Galilee, or under a mountain in Turkey, or in a cave in the Holy Land, and its discovery will be one of the signs that the end is near. 3 religions, 3 billion people, and for all of them, the Ark is not a closed chapter. It is an open chapter, an unfulfilled promise, a presence that became an absence, and that, according to the faith of billions, will one day become a presence again. But perhaps the most honest question we can ask is not where is the Ark, but rather what does the Ark mean? Because when you look at the complete history, from Sinai to the disappearance, what you see is not just the trajectory of an object. It is the trajectory of an idea. The idea that the transcendent can touch the material, that the infinite can inhabit the finite, that there is a point, a physical, real, locatable point where heaven and earth meet. This idea is older than Israel, older than Moses, older than Abraham. It appears in practically every human civilization that has ever existed. The Sumerians had their ziggurats, stairway to heaven. The Egyptians had their pyramids, ascension machines. The Greeks had Olympus. The Hindus had Mount Meru. Each culture, in different ways, built a place where the divine descended and the human ascended. The Ark was the Israelite version of this universal idea, but with a radical difference. In all other traditions, the contact point was fixed, a mountain, a temple, a geographical place that did not move. But the Ark moved. It was carried. It traveled with the people. It crossed the desert. It crossed the Jordan. It circled Jericho. It went from Gilgal to Shiloh, from Shiloh to the battlefield, from the battlefield to Philistia, from Philistia to Beth Shemesh, from Beth Shemesh to Kiriath Jearim, from Kiriath Jearim to Jerusalem. God's presence in the Israelite conception was not tied to a place. It was tied to a people. It went where the people went. It stopped where the people stopped. And when it finally rested in Solomon's temple, it wasn't because God needed a house. It was because the people needed a center. The Ark was portable, and perhaps that is the most significant detail of its entire history. Because when the Ark disappeared, the idea it carried did not disappear with it. It transformed. In Rabbinic Judaism, the Judaism that emerged after the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 AD, God's presence no longer needed an object or a building. The Talmud, Treatise Berakot 6a, says that when 10 people gather to pray, the Shekinah is among them. Not in a gold box, among people. The synagogue replaced the temple. The Torah scroll replaced the Ark. And the Holy of Holies, that room where only the high priest could enter once a year, was replaced by something anyone could access at any time: prayer. It was a theological revolution so profound it is hard to exaggerate its impact. The God who dwelt in a sealed room, accessible only to one man, one day a year, began to dwell in any place where people gathered in his name. The concrete became abstract, the local became universal, the object became an idea. Christianity took this transformation one step further. Paul, writing to the Corinthians, 1 Corinthians, said, "Do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit?" The temple is no longer a building, it is the human body. The ark is no longer a wooden box, it is the heart. The Holy of Holies is no longer a stone room in Jerusalem. It is the interior of each person. If you wanted to trace a line of history, it would go like this. First, God dwelt in a box carried by priests. Then in a room inside a building. Then among gathered people. Then inside each individual person. The trajectory is clear, from the smaller to the larger, from the exclusive to the universal, from the material to the spiritual. The ark, in this sense, was not lost, it was transcended. But that does not diminish the mystery, because the object existed. It was real, it was physical. It had dimensions, 2.5 cubits long, 1.5 cubits wide, 1.5 cubits high. It had weight, it had texture. Bezalel's hands touched that wood. The gold reflected the Sinai sun. The transport poles left marks on the Levites' shoulders. The ark was not just an idea. It was a material fact. And material facts do not evaporate. They go somewhere. Wood rots or is preserved. Gold melts or remains. Cherubim are destroyed or survive. The ark is somewhere, or the atoms that composed it are somewhere, dispersed, transformed, but not annihilated. Nothing completely disappears from the physical universe, not even the Ark of the Covenant, and that is exactly why the search continues. In 2022, a team of researchers using ground-penetrating radar, GPR, technology conducted scans in areas near the Temple Mount. The results showed underground anomalies, consistent with chambers or empty spaces several meters deep. Anomalies are not proof. An empty space could be an ancient cistern, a sewer tunnel, a natural cave. But every anomaly is a possibility, and every possibility keeps the search alive. Meanwhile, in Axum, Ethiopia, the guardian of the Ark continues his vigil. A man alone in a chapel, caring for what he believes to be the most sacred object in human history. He doesn't need radar. He doesn't need excavations. He doesn't need proof. For him, the question is already settled. The Ark is there. It always has been. And perhaps this is the greatest paradox of the Ark of the Covenant. It is, at the same time, the most sought-after artifact in history and the most impossible artifact to seek. Because the most likely place where it could be, under the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, is the most impossible place to excavate on planet Earth. The Temple Mount is not just an archaeological site. It is the most disputed spot in the world. For Jews, it is Har Habayit, the Mount of the House, the place where Abraham almost sacrificed Isaac, where Solomon built the temple, where God's presence dwelt among men. For Muslims, it is the Haram al-Sharif, the noble sanctuary, the place from which the Prophet Muhammad ascended to heaven on the night journey, the third holiest site in Islam after Mecca and Medina. And upon it stand two of the most iconic structures in the world, the Dome of the Rock, with its golden dome that defines the Jerusalem skyline, and the Al-Aqsa Mosque, where thousands of Muslims pray every day. Any attempt at archaeological excavation under the Temple Mount would be interpreted as an act of aggression, not just political, religious, existential. The potential for destabilization is so great that even mentioning the possibility of excavating provokes diplomatic tension. But there is something many people do not know. Between 1996 and 1999, the Islamic Waqf, the authority that manages the Temple Mount, conducted an enormous construction project in the area known as Solomon's Stables, in the southeastern part of the complex. The goal was to create a new underground prayer hall, the Al-Mawani Mosque. And to do this, mechanical excavators removed about 9,000 tons of earth from the Temple Mount. 9,000 tons. The material was dumped as trash in the Kidron Valley, without archaeological supervision, without documentation, without sifting. For archaeologists, it was a catastrophe. That earth contained fragments of 3,000 years of history, from the First Temple period to the Roman, Byzantine, Crusader, and Ottoman periods. Irreplaceable information treated as rubble. In 2004, archaeologists Gabriel Barkay and Zaki Devira initiated Temple Mount Sifting Project, a colossal effort to recover what was possible from that discarded material. Ton by ton, bucket by bucket. With hundreds of volunteers using water and fine sieves, separating every pottery fragment, every coin, every necklace bead, every arrowhead, and they found extraordinary things. Pottery fragments from the First Temple period, from Solomon's time. Arrowheads from the Babylonian period, possibly from Nebuchadnezzar's own troops. Coins from every period of Jerusalem's history. Tesserae, small mosaic cubes from Byzantine floors. Clay seals with ancient Hebrew names. But nothing that could be directly linked to the Ark, which is not surprising. If the Ark was removed before the destruction of the First Temple, its remains would not be in that earth. And if it was destroyed during the Babylonian conquest, any fragment would have been dispersed millennia ago. The sifting project continues to this day. It is the closest thing to an excavation on the Temple Mount that exists. And every fragment recovered is a small victory against destruction, a piece of the most complex puzzle in world archaeology. But there is another document that deserves attention. A document that few people outside of academia know, and which, for decades, has made researchers wonder if the answer about the Ark was hidden in plain sight: the Copper Scroll. Found in 1952 in Cave 3 of Qumran, along with the other Dead Sea Scrolls, the Copper Scroll is different from all the other scrolls found there. All the other Qumran manuscripts are parchment or papyrus. This one is copper, a thin sheet of copper, oxidized and brittle, that had to be cut into strips to be read. And while the other manuscripts contain religious texts, books of the Bible, community rules, hymns, prophecies, the Copper Scroll contains something completely different. It is a treasure list. 64 locations where, supposedly, immense amounts of gold and silver are hidden throughout the Judean region. The amounts are absurd: tons of precious metals, dozens of tons. More gold and silver than the entire Judean economy could reasonably have produced. Some researchers, therefore, dismiss the Copper Scroll as fiction, an exercise in fantasy, a folktale about imaginary treasures. But other researchers took the document seriously. Israeli scholar Benjamin Mazar argued that the quantities, though enormous, were compatible with the accumulated treasure of the Jerusalem temple over centuries. And if the Copper Scroll was a real record, then someone, possibly temple priests, possibly the Qumran community, knew where the sacred treasures had been hidden before the Roman destruction. And item number 1 on the list? The description is fragmentary and debated, but some translators read a reference to a sacred object hidden in a sealed location. It is not explicitly called the Ark. The words are damaged. But the possibility is enough to fuel decades of speculation. The problem is that the descriptions of the locations in the Copper Scroll are maddeningly vague. In the cistern that is under the wall on the east side, in a hole in the rock, 600 bars of silver. Which cistern? Which wall? Which east side? The landmarks used in the text were clear to whoever wrote them 2,000 years ago. For us, they are almost insoluble enigmas. The landscape has changed. The walls were rebuilt, destroyed, and rebuilt again. The cisterns were filled. The paths were erased. It's like trying to follow a treasure map where all the references were written in a language no one fully speaks anymore. And this leads us to a reflection that is rarely made about the Ark, but which is perhaps the most important of all. The impossibility of finding it may not be an accident. it may be the point. Think about it for a moment. The Ark was, by definition, the most restricted object in the ancient world. No one could touch it. No one could look at it. Only one person, once a year, could be in the same room as it, and even then, covered by a cloud of incense so they wouldn't see it directly. The Ark existed to be inaccessible. Its function was to be the limit, the point where the human can no longer advance. And what happened? It became completely inaccessible, no longer behind a veil but behind time, no longer guarded by golden cherubim but by centuries of silence. If the Ark was designed to be the threshold between the human and the divine, then its disappearance is the logical extension of its own nature. It was not lost. It withdrew. It went where it always belonged, beyond human reach. There is a passage in the Talmud, Treatise Yoma 54a, that describes something that happened in the Temple of Jerusalem during the pilgrimage festivals. 3 times a year, Jews from all over the ancient world came to Jerusalem for the feasts, and according to the Talmud, the priests would lift the veil, the Holy of Holies, and show the people the cherubim that were on the Ark. And the cherubim were intertwined with each other, face to face, embracing. And the priests said to the people, "See, God's love for you is like the love between a man and a woman." It is an extraordinary image. The most sacred thing in the world, the Ark of the Covenant, the terrible presence of God that killed whoever touched it, used as a symbol of love, of intimacy, of affection. The same Ark before which Uzzah died was also the Ark whose cherubim embraced. Terror and tenderness, infinite distance and absolute proximity, all in the same object. Perhaps that is why the Ark captures the human imagination in a way no other artifact can. It's not just its historical value, it's not just the gold or the mystery, it's what it represents. The possibility that the abyss between the human and the divine can be crossed, that there is a meeting point, that the distance is not infinite. And now, here we are, more than 3,000 years after Bezalel shaped the first cherub in the Sinai desert, more than 2,500 years since the Ark was last seen by human eyes, and it continues to be sought, with radar and with faith, with excavators and with prayer, with satellite technology and with ancient texts. The search has not stopped, it will not stop, because the Ark of the Covenant is not just an object, it is a question. The oldest question humanity has ever asked, reformulated in acacia wood and beaten gold. Is there something beyond what we can see and touch? And if there is, can we reach it? Each civilization answered this question in a different way. The Egyptians built tombs that were meant to last for eternity. The Greeks invented philosophy to think the unthinkable. The Romans built roads that led everywhere, but not to heaven. And Israel? Israel built a box, a wooden box covered in gold, small enough to be carried by 4 men and large enough to contain the presence of the God who created the universe. The Ark is impossible. It always was. A finite object containing the infinite. A container for that which cannot be contained. A house for him whom the heaven of heavens cannot encompass, as Solomon himself recognized on the day he dedicated the temple. 1 Kings, "But will God indeed dwell on the earth? Behold, heaven and the highest heaven cannot contain you. How much less this house that I have built?" Solomon knew. He built the most magnificent temple in the ancient world and, in the inaugural speech, admitted it was inadequate, that it was impossible, that it was absurd, and he did it anyway, because the alternative was not to try. It was to accept that the abyss is absolute, that the silence is definitive, that there is no meeting point, and that, for Solomon, for Israel, for humanity, was unacceptable. And perhaps this explains why, even now, even in the 21st century, even with all the sophistication of our science and all the cynicism of our age, the Ark of the Covenant continues to fascinate us. It's not nostalgia, it's not superstition, it's something deeper. It's a recognition that there is a dimension of human experience that our instruments do not measure and our theories do not explain. The dimension where art comes from, where love comes from, where the feeling of beauty before a sunset comes from, that feeling that something is speaking, even if there is no voice. The Ark was the address of that dimension, the physical location where the invisible became almost visible. And even though the address has changed, even if the Ark is in a cave in Ethiopia or under the Temple Mount, or dissolved into dust millennia ago, what it pointed to has not changed. The direction has not changed. The question has not changed. So, where is the Ark of the Covenant? After all we have seen, the evidence, the theories, the texts, the excavations, the traditions, the legends, the frauds, and the genuine searches, the honest answer is, we don't know. And perhaps that is the right answer. Perhaps the Ark is exactly where it should be, on the border between the known and the unknown, on the threshold, on the veil, in the space between the question and the answer, where faith begins and certainty ends. For 3,000 years, the Ark of the Covenant has been many things. It was a throne, it was a weapon, it was a symbol, it was a promise, it was a danger, it was lost, sought, claimed, disputed, and transformed into legend. But above all, it was the testimony of a conviction that no destruction could eliminate, the conviction that the sacred exists, that it can be found, and that it is worth dedicating an entire life to searching for it. Whether in a cave under Jerusalem, whether in a chapel in Ethiopia, whether inside your own heart, the search is the same, the direction is the same, and the Ark, wherever it is, continues to point the way. If you made it this far, click on the video appearing on your screen now. I prepared it especially for those who watched this documentary until the end. But before we close, there is a question almost no one asks, and which is perhaps the most disturbing of all. What would happen if someone actually found the Ark of the Covenant? Not in theory, in practice. Imagine that tomorrow, an archaeologist breaks through a stone wall in a cave under Jerusalem and finds a wooden box covered in gold with 2 cherubim carved on top, exactly as described in the book of Exodus. Imagine that carbon-14 tests on the wood give a date consistent with the 13th century BC. Imagine that the metallurgical analysis of the gold is compatible with ancient Egyptian techniques. Imagine that everything matches, everything confirms. The Ark of the Covenant found, real, verifiable. What happens the next morning? The honest answer is chaos. First, the political issue. If the Ark were found under the Temple Mount in disputed territory, who would have a right to it? Israel, as the modern Jewish state and heir to the ancient kingdom. The Palestinian Authority, as representative of the Muslims who have managed the Haram al-Sharif for centuries. Jordan, which has legal custody of Islamic holy sites in Jerusalem since the 1994 peace treaty. The international community, on the grounds that an artifact of this magnitude belongs to humanity. The UN would try to intervene. The Security Council would meet in emergency session. Demonstrations would explode simultaneously in Jerusalem, Ramallah, Amman, Cairo, Istanbul. Each religious and political faction would claim rights. Each government would calculate consequences. Diplomats would work day and night to prevent a wooden and gold box from becoming the trigger for a regional or global conflict. Then, the religious issue. For Judaism, the discovery of the Ark would not just be archaeological news. It would be a theological event of messianic proportions. There are currents within Judaism that believe the reconstruction of the Third Temple and the return of the Ark to the Holy of Holies is a condition for the coming of the Messiah. Organizations like the Temple Institute in Jerusalem have already prepared the sacred vessels. They have already trained priests from Aaron's lineage. They have already woven the high priestly vestments according to the specifications of the book of Exodus. They are waiting. If the ark were found, the pressure to rebuild the temple would become irresistible for a significant part of the population. And rebuilding the temple would mean building over or beside the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque. The implications are almost unthinkable. For Christianity, the discovery would raise equally profound questions. If the Ark still exists as a physical object, what does that mean for Christian theology, which declared it transcended? The Epistle to the Hebrews, chapter 9, is explicit. The Old Covenant, with its rituals and sacred objects, was replaced by the New Covenant in Christ. The Ark was the shadow, Christ is the substance. If the shadow reappeared, concrete and undeniable, what would be the relationship between shadow and substance? Theologians of all denominations would be forced to rethink categories that seemed resolved for millennia. And for Islam, the Quran mentions the tabut, the Ark, in Surah 2, as a sign of legitimacy given by God to King Saul. Islamic tradition treats the Ark with reverence, but does not assign it the same central role as Judaism. If the Ark were found under an Islamic holy site, the tension between respect for the artifact and defense of sacred territory would create a dilemma unprecedented in the history of Islam. And after all the politics, after all the theology, would come the quietest and most devastating question of all, the personal question. What would the Ark mean to you? Not for governments, not for churches, not for academics. For you individually at 3 in the morning when the world is quiet and the questions you avoid during the day come back without permission. If the Ark were found and were real, would that change anything in your life? If you already believe in God, the Ark would be a confirmation. But did you need confirmation? Is the faith that needs proof still faith? And if you don't believe, would the Ark change that? Does an ancient object, however extraordinary, prove the existence of God? Or does it only prove that ancient people believed in God intensely enough to build extraordinary things? Would the Ark confirm the existence of the sacred, or only the existence of the belief in the sacred? It is a crucial distinction, and perhaps the Ark is so powerful precisely because it remains in this ambiguous space. Found, it would become a museum object, tested, catalogued, photographed, protected by bulletproof glass and electronic alarms. Tourists would line up to take selfies. Documentaries would be produced. Books would be written. And in 6 months, humanity would move on to the next novelty. Because that is what we do with resolved mysteries. We consume them and move on. But an unresolved mystery? That one remains. That one works inside us. That one wakes us up at 3 in the morning. The lost Ark is infinitely more powerful than the found Ark would ever be, because the lost Ark is an open question, and open questions are the fuel of the human soul. And that is why I believe the story of the Ark of the Covenant is not at its core a story about an object. It is a story about us, about this strange and stubborn species that looks at the sky and refuses to accept that there is nothing looking back, that builds temples and cathedrals and telescopes and particle accelerators, all at their core, different attempts to answer the same question the Israelites asked in the Sinai desert 3,300 years ago. Are we alone? The Ark was their answer. No. We are not alone. There is something beyond the sand and the sun and the hunger and death. There is something that speaks, that instructs, that punishes, and that forgives. And that something can be found. It can be carried on the shoulders of 4 men. It can live in an acacia wood box covered in gold. It can dwell between 2 cherubim with outstretched wings. And it can, when necessary, split the Jordan River in half and bring down the walls of Jericho. We no longer build arks. But the question the Ark answered, we continue to ask. Every telescope pointed at the stars is a modern Ark. Every probe sent to the edges of the solar system is an attempt to reach out beyond the veil. Every equation of quantum physics describing the behavior of particles no one has ever seen directly is an act of faith. Faith in the invisible order of the universe. Faith that the laws governing the cosmos are understandable. Faith that the mystery has structure. The language has changed. The instruments have changed. But the direction is the same, upward, inward, beyond, always beyond. And in this sense, the Ark of the Covenant is not lost. It is everywhere, in every honest question, in every genuine search, in every moment when a human being looks at the unknown and, instead of retreating, takes a step forward. 3,300 years ago, at the foot of a burning mountain, an artisan named Bezalel took a piece of acacia wood and began to build the most impossible thing the world had ever seen, a house for the infinite. He didn't know it would work. He didn't know if God would truly dwell there. He didn't know if he was building the most sacred object in history or just an empty box covered in gold. But he built it anyway, because the alternative, not trying, was worse than any failure. And here we are, 3 millennia later, still searching, still building, still trying. And as long as there is a human being asking a question for which they have no answer, the Ark of the Covenant remains alive. If you made it to the end of this documentary, click on the video appearing on your screen now. I set it aside especially for those who watched this one until the end.